Rachel judged him for his MAGA hat, but when layoffs threatened her job and her family's future, he did the unthinkable. He stood up for her and an entire workforce. What happens next will leave you inspired and questioning everything you thought you knew about compassion and unity. Comments below where you're watching from, and if you like and love our story, kindly subscribe our channel. Life, inspirational, and motivational tales that explore themes of love, unity, and patriotism. Stay with us always for interesting stories. Thanks. Let's start the story. The office hummed with the familiar sounds of keyboards clicking and hushed conversations. It was another busy morning in the heart of a mid-sized American town, but tension lingered beneath the surface. Emily sat at her desk, her gaze darting between the monitor and the office door, where colleagues gathered in clusters, their whispers carrying unsettling news. In her mid-30s, Emily had built a reputation as a diligent IT professional, but today her confidence was shadowed by an undeniable stress. Rumors of layoffs rippled through the air, unsettling even the most seasoned employees. Emily couldn't shake the growing unease as snippets of conversation reached her ears. "H1B replacements are coming," someone murmured. Her heart sank. She had heard the stories before. Jobs outsourced, careers upended, lives changed overnight. The thought of losing her position, the one thing keeping her family afloat, felt unbearable. Across the room, Mike sat at his desk, quiet and observant. His red MAGA hat rested beside his laptop, as it always did, a symbol of the values he held close. Emily's eyes flickered toward him briefly, her face tightening with disdain. To her, Mike represented everything she opposed: his America First rhetoric, his unwavering confidence in his beliefs. She had avoided him for years, dismissing him as a caricature of a worldview she didn't share. The tension deepened as Emily's inbox chimed. Her breath caught when she saw the subject line: Department Realignment. With trembling hands, she opened the email, the weight of her fears becoming crushingly real. Her livelihood was on the line, and she felt the walls closing in. From his desk, Mike watched her reaction quietly, his face unreadable as the storm around them began to unfold. The announcement came during an all-hands meeting, the kind where the room buzzed with unease even before a word was spoken. The department head, a man with a practiced corporate smile, delivered the news with a rehearsed calm. The company was initiating a cost realignment strategy. They had partnered with a global outsourcing firm and would be integrating H1B workers into critical roles. The reasoning was thinly veiled. Cheaper labor would ensure efficiency and competitiveness. The murmurs that followed quickly turned to disbelief and anger. Emily sat frozen in her chair. Her worst fears had materialized. The words cost realignment echoed in her mind, loud and cruel. Her gaze darted to her co-workers, some whispering furiously, others staring at their desks in stunned silence. Emily wanted to speak up, to argue that their work couldn't simply be replaced by cheaper labor, but the lump in her throat silenced her. Later that afternoon, an email confirmed her worst nightmare. She was on the layoff list. After nearly a decade of dedication, late nights and weekends sacrificed for the company, she was being replaced. Her hands trembled as she stared at the screen. She thought of the mortgage payments she couldn't miss, the school fees for her son, and her elderly parents who relied on her. The future seemed to collapse in on her. Unable to contain the flood of emotions, Emily sought out her closest friend in the office, Rachel. In the quiet break room, her voice cracked as she confided, "I gave this company everything, and they're throwing me away for cheaper labor. Do they even care about the lives they're destroying?" Rachel put a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort she could. "It's not your fault, Emily. The system is broken. They don't see people, just numbers." But Emily's thoughts were darker. She couldn't stop questioning herself. Had she failed somehow? Was she not good enough? The weight of self-doubt and anger bore down on her. That evening, as she drove home, memories of her family filled her mind. She thought of her son, Matthew, eagerly waiting for her to help with his homework. She thought of her parents, whose medical bills she quietly covered every month. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, wondering how she would tell them all that their security was slipping away. In the office, Mike noticed the change in Emily. He saw the weariness in her posture, the tension in her hurried steps. She had avoided him for years, dismissing him as an ideologue. But he couldn't ignore her now. He had seen the scenario play out before. Loyal workers, replaced by promises of efficiency that rarely delivered. It wasn't just about Emily. It was about what this meant for everyone in the office and for the broader American workforce. He had grown up watching his father lose a factory job to overseas competition, and he knew the pain it brought to families and communities. Mike sat at his desk, his eyes lingering on the screen filled with corporate jargon justifying the layoffs. He couldn't just sit by. He knew he had to act. For all her disdain, Emily was his colleague. Her struggle wasn't just hers, it was a reflection of a larger problem, one that he believed he could help fight. Quietly, he began gathering information, determined to protect his team from the storm brewing over their heads. The decision was clear. Mike resolved to stand up not just for Emmeline, but for everyone whose livelihood was being treated as expendable. He believed deeply that this outsourcing strategy would weaken their company and hurt America's workforce in the long run. With a grim determination, he began laying the groundwork for his fight, knowing full well the challenges ahead. Mike stayed late in the office that night, long after most of his colleagues had left. The glow of his monitor illuminated his determined expression as he scrolled through company documents. The more he dug, the more glaring the inconsistencies became. The honeyed workers being hired weren't just cheaper, they were underqualified for the roles they were set to fill. Their credentials, while sufficient on paper, lacked the specialized experience needed for the company's complex systems. Mike could already foresee the domino effect: critical errors, missed deadlines, and dissatisfied clients. As the hours passed, Mike began compiling evidence. He found case studies from other companies that had pursued similar outsourcing strategies. The results were damning: project delays, skyrocketing costs for damage control, and long-term harm to reputations. He thought about their company's current team, experienced and deeply familiar with the work. Replacing them with a cheaper but less skilled workforce wasn't just unfair, it was a risk the company couldn't afford to take. The memories of his father's struggles surged back as he worked. Mike had been a teenager when the factory his father worked at had been shut down. The company had moved operations overseas, citing cost savings. The decision had devastated his family, leaving his father unemployed for years. Mike still remembered the nights his parents whispered anxiously about bills they couldn't pay, and the looks of defeat that replaced his father's once proud demeanor. That pain fueled Mike's resolve. He wouldn't let another family go through the same thing if he could help it. Over the next few days, Mike meticulously built his case. His presentation wasn't just a collection of facts, it was a call to action. He included data on the higher error rates and increased costs associated with H1B replacements, as well as the morale damage to existing employees. He added testimonials from clients who valued consistency and trusted relationships with the current team. Finally, he incorporated stories of other companies that had faced public backlash for similar decisions, warning of the potential harm to the company's reputation. The tension in the office was palpable as the announcement of a senior management meeting circulated. Employees whispered nervously, speculating about what it meant. When Mike received his invitation, he knew it was time. He walked into the meeting room with his laptop under one arm and a folder of printed reports in the other. The room was filled with HR representatives and senior managers, their faces guarded. Mike began his presentation calmly, laying out the facts with precision. He explained how the supposed cost savings of the outsourcing plan would be negated by the drop in quality and efficiency. He highlighted specific risks: delays in onboarding, the steep learning curve for the new workers, and the potential for client dissatisfaction. His voice steadied as he transitioned to the human impact. He spoke about the employees who had given years of their lives to the company, about their families and the communities that depended on them. The initial response was cool, even dismissive. A senior HR manager interrupted, questioning whether the data applied directly to their company. Another mentioned that the global market demanded cost-cutting measures. Mike listened patiently, then delivered the part of his argument he had been holding back. He shared his father's story. The room fell silent as he described the impact of outsourcing on his family. He didn't raise his voice, but the emotion in his words was unmistakable. We talk about costs, but we forget the real cost. It's not just numbers, it's people, families, communities. If we keep going down this path, what kind of company do we want to be? What kind of country do we want to be? For a moment, no one spoke. Then a senior manager leaned forward, visibly moved. "You've given us a lot to think about, Mike. We'll review this carefully." Word of Mike's bold stand spread quickly through the office. Emily heard the whispers first. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Mike, the man she had judged so harshly for years, had spoken up for the team, for her even. Her skepticism warred with a growing sense of gratitude. She watched him from a distance, still struggling to reconcile her old perceptions with what he had done. Later that day, she approached him hesitantly. "I heard about the meeting," she said, her voice uncertain. You stood up for us, for all of us." "Thank you." Mike nodded, his expression calm but sincere. "It wasn't just for you. It's about what's right. This isn't just a job. It's our future. All of ours." Emily left the conversation feeling unsettled but hopeful. For the first time, she saw Mike not as a political adversary, but as someone who genuinely cared about the people around him. It was a perspective she hadn't expected, and it made her think about how much she had misunderstood him. The company-wide meeting was held in the largest conference room, packed with employees whose anxiety and frustration simmered just below the surface. The air felt heavy as senior executives took their places at the front, prepared to address the growing dissent following the layoff announcements. Emily sat near the middle of the room, her stomach twisting into knots. She had never seen her colleagues so visibly agitated. Whispers filled the space, voices tinged with anger and fear. I couldn't hear them. Mike walked into the room quietly, his MAGA hat perched firmly on his head. He scanned the room, his eyes settling briefly on Emily, who avoided his gaze. Taking a seat near the back, Mike set down his notes, prepared for the moment he knew was coming. The murmurs faded as the CEO stood, addressing the crowd with carefully chosen words. "We understand the concerns many of you have raised regarding the restructuring," the CEO began. "These changes are necessary for us to remain competitive in the global market." The words hung in the air like a lead weight. A ripple of frustration moved through the crowd, but no one spoke up. Until Mike stood. His sudden movement drew everyone's attention, and the room fell silent as he walked toward the front. "I'd like to say something," Mike said, his voice steady but firm. He turned to face the employees, not the executives, as though speaking directly to the heart of the team. "I know this decision feels inevitable, like there's nothing we can do, but I believe we need to think carefully about what it truly costs us." He paused, looking around the room, his eyes locking briefly with Emily's before continuing. "Outsourcing may save money in the short term, but at what expense? The people sitting here, the ones who've built this company, are more than just numbers. They are the backbone of what makes this place work." The room remained silent, but the tension was palpable. Mike took a deep breath and began to share his story. "When I was a teenager, my dad worked in a factory. He was a proud man, the kind of guy who never missed a shift, always put in overtime and never complained. But one day his company decided it could save money by moving operations overseas. My dad lost his job. He spent months trying to find work, and when he couldn't, it broke him. He went from being the man who provided for his family to a man who felt like he had nothing to offer." Mike's voice caught for a moment, but he steadied himself. "I watched my family struggle. We nearly lost our home. My mom had to take on 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. That experience shaped me, and it's why I wear this hat. To me, it's not just about politics. It's about standing up for the people who make this country what it is. People like my dad, people like you." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she listened, her heart aching at the raw honesty in his words. She had never expected this depth of compassion from Mike, the man she had judged so quickly. His story wasn't just a plea. It was a reminder of what they all stood to lose. Mike turned his attention to the executives. "This isn't just about jobs. It's about the American dream, about giving people the opportunity to work hard and succeed. If we don't stand up for our own, who will? This isn't just about profits. It's about our nation's future." The room erupted into applause. Employees who had been quiet moments before now cheered, their voices echoing Mike's sentiments. Even the executives looked taken aback by the passion in the room. Emily clapped alongside her colleagues, her tears now falling freely. For the first time, she saw Mike for who he truly was, a man driven by conviction, compassion, and an unwavering belief in the strength of the people around him. As the applause died down, the CEO cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mike. You've given us a lot to consider. We'll review the outsourcing plan and explore other options." The meeting ended, but the energy lingered. Employees gathered in small groups, their spirits lifted by Mike's speech. Emily approached him cautiously, her voice soft but sincere. "Mike, I'm sorry. I've been so wrong about you. What you said today, it meant everything." Mike smiled, his tone light. "It's not about me, Emily. It's about all of us. We're in this together." Emily nodded, her heart full of gratitude and newfound respect. For the first time, she felt hope, not just for herself, but for the company and the people who made it what it was. The tension in the office remained thick in the days following the company-wide meeting. Employees awaited word from management, their emotions oscillating between hope and resignation. For Emily, the weight felt particularly heavy. She had spent sleepless nights replaying Mike's speech in her mind, struck by the authenticity and compassion behind his words. She couldn't reconcile the man who had stood up for their jobs with the caricature she had built in her mind. The announcement came unexpectedly during an afternoon lull. A company-wide email popped into every inbox, its subject line simple yet ominous: Workforce Strategy Update. Emily clicked it with trembling fingers, her heart pounding as she scanned the message. In the email, the CEO acknowledged the feedback from employees and commended Mike's thoughtful presentation. The message went on to outline a revised strategy. Layoffs would be paused indefinitely, and instead of outsourcing critical roles, the company would invest in upskilling its current workforce. Specialized training programs and resources would be introduced to help employees adapt to new challenges, ensuring long-term growth. For both the team and the organization, Emily stared at the screen in disbelief. Relief washed over her in waves as she read the words again, hardly able to believe what she was seeing. The office erupted in a collective cheer as others processed the news. Conversations filled the air as colleagues expressed gratitude and excitement. For the first time in weeks, there was hope. Mike, seated at his desk, nodded quietly when someone patted his back in thanks. He wasn't one for big displays, but the sense of accomplishment in his chest was undeniable. His efforts had paid off, not just for him, but for everyone. Later that afternoon, Emily found herself standing at Mike's desk. She hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice soft but steady. "Mike, can we talk?" He looked up from his computer, his expression calm. "Of course." She took a seat across from him, her hands folded nervously. "I wanted to thank you, not just for what you did in the meeting, but for everything. You stood up for us, even when Her voice faltered, but she pushed through. "Even when I didn't deserve it. I misjudged you. I thought I knew who you were because of your hat and your views, but I was wrong. You're so much more than that." Mike smiled gently, his tone kind. "Emily, I get it. People see the hat and make assumptions, but it's not about politics for me. It's about believing in the people who make this country strong. And that includes you." Her eyes brimmed with tears as she nodded. "I didn't just misjudge you. I dismissed you. And I'm sorry for that." Mike leaned forward slightly. "It's never too late to understand someone, Emily. What matters is that we're here now, working together. That's what counts." Their conversation ended with a handshake that carried a weight of mutual respect and newfound understanding. For Emily, it was more than an apology. It was a turning point in how she viewed not just Mike, but the people around her. The office buzzed with energy in the following days. Employees who had once felt defeated now shared ideas for training programs and discussed ways to improve their workflow. The fear that had gripped the team began to dissolve, replaced by camaraderie and determination. Conversations often circled back to Mike's role in sparking the change, with many expressing admiration for his courage and integrity. Emily, inspired by the shift in morale, wrote an email to the entire office. In her message, she shared her personal journey of judgment and understanding, openly acknowledging Mike's role in saving their jobs. She praised his advocacy, calling him a voice of reason and compassion when we needed it most. The email concluded with a call for unity, urging her colleagues to set aside differences and focus on what truly mattered, supporting one another. The response to Emily's email was overwhelming. Replies poured in from colleagues who felt equally moved by Mike's actions and Emily's honesty. For many, it marked a shift in how they approached their own biases and assumptions. Some reached out to Mike directly, thanking him for standing up for the team. Others expressed a renewed commitment to the company's future, inspired by the changes taking place. In the weeks that followed, the office transformed. Training sessions began, equipping employees with the skills needed to tackle emerging challenges. The energy was contagious as employees took ownership of their growth, driven by the company's investment in their potential. The decision to prioritize the existing workforce over outsourcing had not only preserved jobs, but strengthened the team's bond. For Mike, the experience reinforced his belief in standing up for what's right. He remained humble despite the recognition, brushing off praise with his signature calm demeanor. He often deflected attention to the team as a whole, emphasizing their collective strength. Emily, meanwhile, became a vocal advocate for fostering understanding and collaboration in the workplace. She initiated small gatherings where employees could share their stories and perspectives, creating a culture of empathy and mutual respect. Her transformation was evident to everyone, including Mike, who watched with quiet pride. The once divided office had become a place of unity and shared purpose, thanks to the actions of one man who refused to stay silent. Mike's stand had not only saved jobs, but also ignited a movement that extended far beyond the workplace. It reminded everyone that strength lies not in our differences, but in our ability to come together for the greater good. Mike unlocked the door to his modest home, the quiet hum of the evening welcoming him as he stepped inside. He hung his coat and carefully placed his red MAGA hat on the small table by the door. For the first time in days, the weight that had been pressing on his chest felt lighter. The house was still, save for the ticking of the old clock in the corner. Mike walked to the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee, his thoughts drifting to everything that had unfolded. Sitting down at the kitchen table, he opened his laptop and scrolled through the messages he had received from his colleagues. Words of gratitude filled the screen, but Mike read them with humility. The recognition wasn't what mattered to him. What mattered was that they had made it through together, and that the people who had built the company with their hard work would still have their livelihood. His gaze shifted to the corner of the room where a small framed photo of his father rested. Mike stood and picked it up, studying the face of the man who had inspired him to fight for what was right. The memory of his father's struggles, his quiet resilience in the face of loss, came rushing back. Holding the frame tightly, Mike whispered, "This one's for you, Dad." Meanwhile, Emily was experiencing her own transformation. The experience with Mike had profoundly shifted her perspective. She no longer saw people through the narrow lens of her assumptions. Inspired by Mike's example, she began volunteering at a local employment center, helping unemployed workers find new opportunities. She spent her weekends teaching resume writing workshops and connecting people to resources that could help them rebuild their lives. One evening, as Emily was sorting through job postings at the center, she paused and thought about the lessons she had learned. Her voice was soft as she made a quiet promise to herself. From now on, I'll judge people by their actions, not by the labels I put on them. As weeks turned into months, Emily and Mike's paths continued to intersect. They decided to channel their shared values into a new initiative at work. Together, they launched a program aimed at fostering collaboration and understanding across political and social divides. They organized workshops, team-building exercises, and open forums where employees could share their stories and build bridges of empathy. The program's success began to ripple through the workplace, inspiring employees to set aside differences and focus on what united them. It wasn't just about jobs anymore. It was about creating a culture where everyone felt seen and valued. They spent months constructing the German people's faith in the upcoming mission. One day, as they wrapped up a particularly engaging workshop, Emily turned to Mike. "You know," she said with a smile, "we make a pretty good team." Mike chuckled softly. "We do. And it's just the beginning." Their efforts became a cornerstone of the company's culture, reminding everyone that unity and understanding were powerful tools for change. As they stood side by side, they knew they had created something far greater than either of them had imagined. Together, they believed in the strength of the American workforce, the power of resilience, and the importance of standing up for what was right. Emily's voice echoed Mike's sentiments as she addressed their colleagues during a company event. Together, we can protect the American workforce and build a future where everyone thrives. And for the first time in a long time, everyone in the room believed it. This story is a testament to the power of unity, compassion, and standing up for what's right. Mike's unwavering determination to protect his colleagues from an unjust system proved that one voice, when rooted in purpose and fairness, can inspire meaningful change. Emily's transformation, from judgment to understanding, reminds us that we can all grow by looking beyond our assumptions and embracing humanity in others. At its core, this journey was about valuing people over profits, recognizing the contributions of local workers, and addressing systemic issues in ways that build rather than divide. It showed that when we come together, setting aside differences to focus on shared goals, we can achieve a stronger and more resilient future for everyone. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced or witnessed an act of kindness that changed your perspective? Maybe it was a moment of unexpected compassion, a time when someone stood up for what was right, or a situation that brought people together in the face of adversity. Share your story in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about how we can build a more united and understanding world. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Together we can spread hope, foster understanding, and work toward a brighter future.